Hey guys, Mike here, coming live from Studio One for another build of the day. If you guys are new to this series, this is a live stream that we're doing every day, Monday through Friday. We'll be going live at 5 p.m. every day this week, highlighting not only a particular camera, but a full build around it. So we'll do camera, lens, accessories along with it, and we'll put it all together with you and kind of talk about why we're putting it together the way we do and what sorts of uses it may have. If you guys have questions during this at any point, please comment below. We'll have a Q&A section at the end of the video where we'll answer any of those questions and do our best to cover those then. If you guys have any builds that you want to see, comment below as well. The build we're doing today is actually one that was requested last week, which is the Canon C500 Mark II paired with one of our Atlas Orion anamorphic lenses. So without further ado, let's go ahead and introduce the gear that we'll be looking at today. The camera will be the Canon C500 Mark II here. If you guys haven't seen anything about this camera, it's Canon's newest high-end cinema camera, which features a 6K full-frame CMOS sensor, capable of shooting in cinema raw light up to 6K 60 frames a second in a 10-bit color space, or 6K 24 or 30 frames a second in a 12-bit color space. It does also feature non-RAW encoding, so if you don't want to have to deal with the cinema raw light codec, you can shoot in Canon's XF AVC codec, although it is limited to a 4K resolution. Camera's awesome. If you ever worked with the older C500 Mark II, you'll notice that the body's been redesigned. It's much shorter, so you don't have as much height to deal with. And then the camera's been redesigned to be as modular as possible. The EVF here can be removed, and for our build today, we're actually going to be taking that off and replacing it with an expansion unit. And you'll notice the XLR ports have been relocated to be down here on the actual main body. So we don't need the annoying top shell monitor to have our XLR inputs. The camera features an interchangeable lens mount, so we've switched it over to a PL mount for today so that we can run our Atlas Orion anamorphics in PL. And yeah, I've been pleasantly impressed by this camera. It packs a massive punch in the small little body. We'll go over some menu specific things in terms of setting up the anamorphic later after we get over the the build of it all. So if you guys have questions about that, just wait, we'll probably cover some of those. But yeah, phenomenal camera. I haven't gotten to do as many field tests with it as I'd like since it is fairly new, but from what I've gotten out of it, fantastic image, awesome camera. We're going to pair that with the expansion unit I talked about. This is the Canon EU V2 expansion unit, which gives us a few additional I/O ports here on the side, namely a Genlock and sync port here, which is very useful if you're doing any multicam streams or things like that, so you can Genlock your cameras together. But for our purposes today, mainly we're using the V-mount battery plate on the back. That's going to give us more power, and then for our Teradek unit that we're running for video, we'll have this P-tap output right here, so we're able to power that device right off of the back. You'll also get 2 additional audio inputs, so if you are doing any broadcast situation with the camera where you're going to need to have multiple channels of audio, this will give you a total of 4 XLR inputs straight into camera that's going to embed that video or that audio into your video to help and keep that workflow just smoother and easier for you. Then we have the Atlas Orion 65mm anamorphic lens. These lenses came out last year or the year before, I can't recall specifically, but they aimed to allow a lower budget shoot to access anamorphic. Typically, anamorphic lenses are very, very costly, and these lenses are a fraction of the cost, allowing you to break into anamorphic with a much lower budget. They are also much faster than other anamorphics. They're a T2 wide open, which allows a lot of light to come in. So if you're needing a low light situation or something like that, you can utilize these lenses. I will note, though, that I've found they can be a little soft when you're shooting wide open at a T2. For optimal sharpness and focus quality, I would stop down to about a 2.8 to a 4, something in that range, and it sharpens up a lot more. But they are awesome 2 times anamorphic, so you're going to get a really nice ultra wide field of view with them. And yeah, once we get everything up, you'll see with Aristotle, who's standing in for us over in the corner, just how wide that field of view is really going to be. And then we'll be running the Teradek Bolt 500. Our receiver's on the back of our monitor. I can wheel that out in a little bit. But this is just a small box that'll mount on camera, and we'll run an SDI signal into it, and it's going to wirelessly transmit that signal so that my monitor can stay portable, and I don't have to have any cables tying camera or anything together with that. Yeah, I think that's all the overview I have for it. So let's go ahead and start putting everything together, and yeah, we'll go from there. Alrighty, so to start, we are going to need to remove our EVF here because our expansion module is going to actually attach over the top of it. So to do that, we're just going to take this small Allen key, and I'm going to start by removing these two top screws. The EVF is completely optional. It's able to be removed, and there's a small plastic cover that you can replace it with. So if you are doing any gimbal applications or things like that, you can minimize the kind of weight of the camera and make it as small as possible. The two top screws, you'll notice I've completely removed, as our EVF is actually going to slide off. These back two screws that I'm going to remove, though, they actually stay in the EVF, so they're not going to pull all the way out. So I'm just going to loosen them until I don't feel them in there anymore, and we'll know that that's good to go ahead and remove. From here, I'm just going to give a small pull, and you'll see it disconnects. This connector here is what carries all the information from the EVF or our expander, so make sure you keep that nice and clean. I'm going to go ahead and remove the plastic cover on our expander, and I'll replace that on my EVF to help keep that port clean, dust, debris, things like that. We don't want that getting in there. From here, it's just a matter of sliding our expansion unit on. There are two grooves right up at the top here. I hope you guys can make those out. And they correspond to two pieces right there, which are going to be our guides for sliding this on. And we'll just press it in like so. We then need to go ahead and use 4 of those socket cap screws to tie it down. So I'll go ahead and place one in each of my screw holes on the top, and we'll tie those guys down. Then the other two for this are actually on the bottom of our camera. We're going to mount those right there. And that's going to fully lock our expansion unit onto the back of our camera. So when we're mounting a large brick battery, it's not going to pull on our camera or anything like that. One final turn to tighten that guy down. Great, and that's our expander all attached there. And I really like it. You guys can probably see it better from this angle. These function controls are usually on the back of the camera, so the expander actually covers it up. And so instead of just losing those controls entirely, they just relocate those to the side of the expander, so you maintain your function control and your joystick to travel your menu and everything. From here, let's go ahead and attach our monitor unit. This is a attachment that'll go on our front. Can also mount to the rear of the top handle, but I found the front to be the best, and it'll keep your shock mount facing up if you're doing any monitor attachment or things like that. You do have some left to right movement here, so if you need your monitor to be farther out on one side, you can cheat it over to give just a little bit more distance there. Then we have one small cable. If you guys ever shot with the Canon C500 Mark II, you'll be familiar with these cables, but instead of 2 that we have to run up, one for video, one for sound, we just only have one, which is going to carry the video output from our port right here. Line up your arrows, and that'll have the pins oriented in the proper direction. And then this plugs in just to the back of the video on the back of our monitor here. Then the rest of this, well, let's go ahead and throw our side handle on. This is an important time to note. Oftentimes, people give me a call saying that the side grip stopped working on their camera. Almost always, I'd say 9 out of 10 times, it's just this port right down here. It becomes slightly loose over time as it's used and pulled, and it's usually just a matter of just fully securing that in, and it solves all the issues. So if you guys ever experience any trouble with that, go ahead, just check that port. It's probably the culprit. It's important to talk about this rosette here. It is a ARRI standard rosette, so if you guys have any hand grip extensions, things like that, you're able to use those and relocate the hand grip a little bit, although you will need a extension cable for the hand grip's plug so that the cable's long enough to go into the camera. Great, and lastly, we'll just need to throw our tripod plate on the bottom here. Line these guys up. Cold shoe mount that I'm going to thread into the Teradek here, and we'll mount him up on top. It's always best to mount these on top of camera if you can, because you want your antenna to have a nice, easy path to send signal to the receiver. So the more vertical and clear you can make that, the easier that signal is going to carry. So I'm just going to pop this guy on right there and tighten him down. We have 2 cables for our Teradek. There's going to be one 2-pin LEMO to P-tap for our power, which I'm just going to tap off of that P-tap port that we have on the side here. One thing I found with this port with certain P-tap cables is it can interfere with some batteries, so you may need to have a relocator or something like that, or like a P-tap extension, just to move your plugs up a little higher depending on the size of the battery that you're using. But I'll just go ahead and run this 2-pin up to our power up here. And then we just have an SDI here that we're going to go out of the monitor output on the camera into the SDI input of our Teradek. I've talked about it before, but right now I'm really just coiling the excess cable of my SDI here so that I don't have a bunch of excess cable hanging off, getting in the way as I'm working with the camera and everything. All right, and then finally we will just need to mount our monitor. There's usually a cable tie here, there he is, to hold this excess to try and keep it out of the way. Especially with these PL mounts, you don't want that cable in the way as we're putting our lens on. Helps keep it nice and clear. Alrighty, so we'll just line this guy up and get him mounted in. And finally, we just have a nice IDX 98 watt-hour brick for the back of our camera here to provide power for our accessories and everything. So we can go ahead and boot these guys up. Now, when we were talking about this camera last week, when there's a question about its ability to shoot anamorphic, and I had mentioned that it does internal anamorphic D-squeeze recording. That was actually a misspeak. After further investigating the camera and working with its anamorphic a little bit, I realized that it'll de-squeeze your viewing, but it does not de-squeeze the recorded image, meaning that your editor or post-processing will still have to process the footage a bit to de-squeeze it in post. One of the main concerns whenever you're having to de-squeeze an image in post and not in camera is your field of view, because it's very unreliable when you're trying to use a monitor or something like that to de-squeeze, to make sure that you're seeing the exact frame that you're going to finish in your editing software. I've found, though, through all of my tests with this, at least with Adobe Premiere that I was using, that the reference frame I get on my monitor here and on my output matches identical to the frame that I'll get in Premiere after I finish processing that. So I'll show you guys how to set up the internal de-squeeze and then how the image looks if you don't set up the internal de-squeeze, so you can see why we need to do that squeezing and everything. So I'll wheel this guy over here. This is our Flanders Scientific 21-inch monitor, and I have our Teradek here on the back receiving our signal so that I can keep that nice and wireless on wheels for you guys. And so you'll notice that our image looks very strange. It's very stretched out because of that anamorphic element. And so we're going to need to go into the camera and tell it, A, what the squeeze factor of our lens is, and then B, to de-squeeze both of our outputs. To do that, we'll go into our menu, and you're going to look for the monitor setup, which is this icon right here. And we're going to go to page 5, which is going to have all of our anamorphic settings. First things first, we're going to want to go down to the anamorphic de-squeeze, and we're going to change that to a 2x squeeze factor. That's going to set the proper squeeze factor for our lenses, which is going to allow the camera to de-squeeze and display that properly. Then there's two things that we want to turn on. First is our video terminal, which is the video terminal right up in the front of our camera, which runs to my monitor that I'm working off of. So we'll go ahead and turn that on. That'll allow me as an operator to view the de-squeezed image. But you'll notice that your guys' image is still squeezed. So I have to tell the monitor terminal to also send that de-squeezed image. So I'll come down here to anamorphic mon/HDMI, and I'll change that to on as well. And now you'll notice that you guys get this really nice 2:3:9:1 aspect ratio, and we can get that full de-squeezed image there so you guys can see everything. In post, there's really a two-part process that you'll need to do, at least for Adobe Premiere, which is interpreting the footage as it comes into the editing program, telling it that it was shot in a 2x de-squeeze mode, and then you'll need to adjust the sequence settings within Premiere to tell it to be a 2:3:9:1 aspect ratio. If you're finishing in like a 1920 by 1080 frame, instead of having a 1920 by 1080 sequence, it would be a 1920 by 803 sequence, and that's going to be a 2:3:9:1 aspect ratio. It'll be different based on the exact resolution that you're doing, so use some online resources and you'll be able to find the exact aspect ratio for your resolution. But the frame here should match exactly to what you'll have in Premiere once you've done those changes, still allowing you to maintain that anamorphic workflow. If you guys are new to anamorphic, it may be better to go with a camera that can do internal de-squeeze and record. Those cameras that we carry on the lower end would be the Panasonic GH5. All of our Red DSM-C2 cameras, other than the Red Raven, so that would be the Scarlett W, the Epic W, Weapon, and the Gemini, will all do that internal. And then our Alexa Mini 4.3 body kit will also do that internal anamorphic de-squeeze. That'll allow you to record the image de-squeeze just like this to minimize that post-workflow process. But yeah, I wanted to show you guys some really cool features of the anamorphic. First, you'll notice that as I pull focus, we get this really interesting center pull from the anamorphic de-squeeze, which is really sought after for the interesting character that it adds to the image. But one of the coolest features, I'll show you guys. I'll leave frame, but if you guys watch the image here, I'm going to use a flashlight just to show you, but you'll be able to see the anamorphic flare. I hope you guys can make that out, but it's going to give you a nice blue streak across the frame of a flare. If you think J.J. Abrams or Transformer movies, anything with a lot of lens flares, you'll be able to create those right in camera without having to add them in post, giving you a really interesting cinematic look right in camera. And that is setting up Anamorphic for the C500 Mark II. Not a terribly difficult workflow or setup, just a couple things that you want to make sure you're doing. While we have the camera up though and the menu, I did want to show you guys a few things with the camera. With the addition of the Cinema Raw Light codec, the camera functions a little bit differently depending on the exact sensor size that you plan on using. Similar to RED cameras, when they're recording their RAW codec, every resolution decrease is a crop of the camera's sensor. So if we look, this is using our full frame 6K sensor since we're shooting full raw light. But if I come over to my record settings, and you'll see I'm at sensor mode here. I'll wait for you guys to get a good view of that. And I'll change my sensor mode from full frame to super 35mm cropped. Now when I exit, you'll notice that my resolution up here in the top is now changed to 4K, and my field of view has cropped in that of a super 35 sensor. Not a, a negative so much as something to be aware of, managing the data rates inside the camera, things like that. It has to crop that sensor to maintain the raw workflow with it. And if we want to do 2K and shoot the raw, we'll have to do the Super 16 crop, which is going to bring us in even tighter there. Just something to be aware of. If you're wanting to shoot less than 6K but still use the full camera's sensor, my recommendation is to change your recording format to XFAVC and utilize your full frame that way. That way you still get your nice full field of view, but you're not having to crop to get your lower resolution. It's all kind of dependent on what you want out of the camera and how you intend to work with it. So think about what frame and things like that that you're going to need for your production and pick which is going to be the best for it. Well, that kind of wraps up everything I had to talk about the C500 today. Let's see if you guys had any questions about the C500 Mark II or anything while we were going. No questions so far, so if you guys do have any come up, comment below, let me know, and we can answer those down the road. And then let me know what you guys want to see. Someone asked for a C200 build, so tomorrow we're going to be taking a look at that. So do comment below and let me know what gear you guys want to take a look at. We'll highlight it in builds down the road. If you guys are looking to do any live streaming, we have all the gear to accommodate that, but our partners over at PerfectCircle.pro can hook you up with an operator as well as the gear to make your stream as easy as possible. We'll have someone go out to site for you, help set up everything to make your life as easy as possible. So if that's something you're interested in, go check them out. Otherwise, we'll plan to see you guys tomorrow for another Build of the Day.